10 years. It's this is such a great bookstore. And I don't know whether it's just the present state of publishing or the present state of e-books or the present state of something, but certainly going around independent bookstores on this trip, you know, you really have a very, very strong sense that this is where the culture gets kept alive. And so thank you from an author's point of view of supporting independent bookstores, because we all really, really need them to live and be alive and actually have opinions about the things that they sell, which is, you know, they actually read them sometimes, I think, you know, amazing. There is an automaton in the heart of this story, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but seeing as this is really my last night on the road, so to speak, there's one thing I'd like to tell you, because I tried to say it in a radio interview and it got cut out, and this is my chance to overcome the censorship and that I was sort of asked about the automaton in the book and why I'd done that, and I answered that, and we can talk about that later, and then I answered it again, and then the interviewer said, "No, but tell me, really, what is it with you, you know, an automata?" And so I said, "Well, I told you earlier, you know, that I grew up above a GM dealership in a small town in Australia, and you know, my mother ran the spare parts department, and I was used to seeing all sorts of, you know, there were mechanical things all over the place and oily rags and everything, and so within this environment I was really slow to understand that my parents were automata." "No," she said. I thought you should leave that in the interview, really, but anyway, she cut it out, and was amusing for me, and thank you, those of you who laughed, thank you. I thought it would have been great radio. Anyway, I'm going to read just from Catherine's voice, so all you really need to, and from the very beginning, so all you really need to know, or imagine, is that the accent I'm speaking with is an English one, and that I'm a woman, and I'm sorry I left my dress at home. "Dead, and no one told me. I walked past his office and his assistant was bawling. 'What is it, Felicia?' 'Oh, haven't you heard? Mr. Tyndall's dead.' What I heard was Mr. Tyndall hurt his head. I thought, for God's sake, pull yourself together.' 'Where is he, Felicia?' Now that was a reckless thing to ask. Matthew Tyndall and I had been lovers for 13 years, but he was my secret, and I was his. In real life, I always avoided his assistant. Now her lipstick was smeared and her mouth folded like an ugly sock. 'Where is he?' she sobbed. What an awful, awful question. Not understanding what had happened, I asked again. 'Catherine, he is dead,' and thus set herself off on a second fit of bawling. I marched into Matthew's office as if to prove her wrong. This was not the sort of thing one did. My secret darling was a big deal, the head curator of metals. There was a photograph of his two sons on the desk. His silly, soft tweed hat was lying on the shelf. I snatched it, I don't know why. Of course, she saw me steal it, but I no longer cared. I fled down the Phillips stairs into the main room, under the main floor. On that April afternoon, in the Georgian halls of the Swinburne Museum, amongst the 1,000 daily visitors, the 80 employees, there was not one single soul who had any idea of what had just happened. Everything looked the same as usual. It was impossible Matthew was not there, waiting to surprise me. He was very distinctive, my lovely. There was a vertical frown mark just to the left of his big, high nose. His hair was thick, his mouth was large, soft, and always tender. And of course, he was married. Of course, of course. He was 40 when I first noticed him, and it was 7 years before we became lovers. I was by then just under 30 and still something of a freak. That is, the first female horologist the museum had ever seen. 13 years, my whole life. It was a beautiful world we lived in all that time. SW1, the Swinburne Museum, one of London's almost secret treasure houses. It had a considerable horological department, a world-famous collection of clocks and watches, automata, and other wind-up engines. If you had been there on the 21st of April 2010, you may have seen me, the oddly elegant, tall woman with the tweed hat scrunched up in her hand. I may have looked mad, but perhaps I was not so different from my colleagues, the various curators and conservators pounding through the public galleries on their way to a meeting or a studio or a storeroom where they would soon interrogate an ancient object, a sword, a quilt, or perhaps an Islamic water clock. We were museum people, scholars, priests, repairers, sandpaperers, scientists, plumbers, mechanics, train spotters really, with narrow specialties in metals, and glass, and textiles, and ceramics. We were of all sorts, we insisted, even while we were secretly confident that all the stereotypes held true. A horologist, for instance, could never be a young woman with good legs, but must be a slightly nerdy man of less than 5'6", cautious, a little strange, with fine blonde hair and some difficulty in looking you in the eye. You might see him scurrying like a mouse through the ground floor galleries with his ever-present jangling keys, looking as if he were the keeper of the mysteries. In fact, no one in the Swinburne knew any more than a part of the labyrinth. We had reduced our territories to rat runs. The routes we knew would always take us where we wanted to go. This made it an extraordinarily easy place to live a secret life and to enjoy the perverse pleasure that such a life can give. In death, it was a total horror. That is, the same but brighter and more in focus. Everything was both crisper and further away. How had he died? How could he die? I rushed back to my studio and Googled Matthew Tyndall, but there was no news of any accident. However, my inbox had an email which lifted my heart until I realized he had sent it at 4 p.m. the day before. I kiss your toes. I marked it unread. There was no one I dared turn to. I thought, I will work. It was what I had always done in a crisis. It's what clocks were good for, their intricacy, their perfect, peculiar puzzles. I sat at the bench in the workroom trying to resolve an exceedingly whimsical 18th century French clock. My tools lay on a soft grey chamois. 20 minutes previously I'd liked this French clock, but now it seemed vain and preening. I buried my nose inside Matthew's hat. Snuffle, we would have said. I snuffle you, I snuffle your neck. I could have gone to Sandra, the line manager. She was always a very kind woman, but I could not bear anyone, not even Sandra, handling my private business, putting it out on the table and pushing it around like so many broken necklace beads. My German grandfather and my very English father were clockmakers. Nothing too spectacular, first Clerkenwell, then the city, then Clerkenwell again. Mostly good, solid English 5-wheel clocks. But it was an item of faith for me, even as a little girl, that there was something, that there was a very soothing, this was a very soothing, satisfying occupation. For years I thought that clockmaking must still any turmoil in one's breast. I was so confident in my opinion and so completely wrong. The tea lady provided her depressive offering. I observed the anti-clockwise motion of the slightly curdled milk, just waiting for him, I suppose. So when a hand did touch me, my whole body came unstitched. It felt like Matthew, but Matthew was dead. And in his place was Eric Croft, the head curator of horology. I began to howl and could not stop.